So let's talk about your characters. Your characters are what are going to drive your book. They're in our genre, it's the most important things. You need to make them feel alive. You need to make them breathe. You need to make them just realistic. So let's talk about ways to do that. First thing that we'll start to talk about is the concept of a sympathetic character. Sympathetic characters. This is kind of the word that a lot of us use because sympathetic is better than saying protagonists and antagonists or heroes and villains, because you want generally almost all of your characters to be sympathetic for one reason or another. Okay? Even your villains, the villains that you love, are sympathetic for some odd reason. And we'll talk about that. Let me throw it at you guys first that have not taken the class before, since the rest of you know answers to this, hopefully, if you don't. What makes a character sympathetic to you? What makes you like a character when you're reading one in the book?
Some similarity between you and the character.
Okay. You hit one of the big three right off the bat.
Yeah, problems.
Okay, problems. Problems are good. Another way to put this is the underdog syndrome. We like underdogs, don't we? It's just human nature. Okay, what else?
Consistency.
Okay.
I mean, they can evolve, but not doing just random things.
Okay, I like that. That's not one I usually put up there, but that's a very good point. Characters should act like themselves. And you can't get to know someone if they're not consistent. In fact, characters in books actually tend to be far more consistent than people are in real life. This is a case of truth is stranger than fiction. In the book, you're going to have to give foreshadowing and reasoning for why a character is acting the way if they're acting erratic, which they can do, that in real life, you may never not give. You just may be a moody person, and you're jumping all over the place. In the book, you're going to have to establish this is a moody person, that, and this sort of thing. All right, what else?
I'd say they have kind of depth in their interests and what they think about.
Depth. That's a good one. What else?
Something you aspire to be.
Okay, that's one of the other big three that I usually point out. In a lot of ways, I view characters like this. It's almost like there's a bit of continuum between what we call the everyman and the Superman or woman. The idea being that these two things are kind of core concepts that make up what attaches us to a character. Either we see what we are in them, or we see what we want to be in them. And a lot of times you will have books that this is the growth archetype of the character. Can you think of one of these?
Star Wars.
Star Wars! That's a great one. What else?
Randolph.
Okay, Rand. Or basically anyone on the hero's journey. I honestly don't think Frodo counts. I think Frodo stays as an everyman, and that's perfectly plausible. I mean, Frodo stays as an everyman, Aragorn stays as a Superman. In the movie, they move Aragorn from here to here, but in the books, he basically starts here and stays there. And it's fine to do that. But these 10, any three of these archetypes can work. I like to put up Spider-Man here. Because he basically fits the perfect archetype of the everyman who becomes Superman, right? And that's why his story is so compelling. It's why it works. But there are plenty of stories that work with the Superman straight off. And we're talking, in this we talk about power level, which is not always the same way it is. There are plenty of books that are about, the young woman who is not socially adept, who becomes super socially adept. And this is the same sort of archetype. Or stories that start off with somebody being perfectly socially adept. I mean, Oscar Wilde's characters are all basically social supermen, right? And we like reading about them because we're like, wow, I wish I could come up with a retort that quickly in the middle of a conversation. I love this character. They still are going to have a growth arc, but their growth arc is not going to be in power level. It's going to be in something else. So that's kind of just one way to look at characters. It's not the only way. but it is one way to view your characters. What about them? Almost every good character, rather than, they may move along this, but almost every good character is going to start off with a little smidge of this and a little smidge of that. And so I will add under the aspire to be kind of the same concept, but they are an expert at something. In other words, they have a superpower. And their superpower may not be something we normally think of. A great example of this is going to be Sam from Lord of the Rings. He is superhumanly loyal, would you not say? He has one attribute. Everything else about him is basically kind of, goofy and befuddled and, the midget in the world of giants. And yet, he has this one super quality that all of us would love to have. And because of that, he's consistently in polls as people's favorite character from Lord of the Rings. In fact, there's a lot of discussion that he probably is the hero of the whole story, is Sam. And that is because Sam has this blend down really well. Yes, he's kind of a fool in a lot of ways, but he has that one thing that is defining about him, and it's something that when you look at him, you say, yeah, I wish I could be Sam for that moment. So, expert at something. The other one I'm going to add up here is that they are proactive. Have we talked about proactivity? Did I do anything about this?
Yeah.
I think I talked about it like the first week or maybe the second. Now, keep in mind that you don't need to do all of these. And there are a few more I'll throw up here. These are all tools in your toolbox that you can use to increase the level of the sympathetic nature of a given character. If you can combine them all, great. In fact, pretty much everything up here are things that you should try to put in almost every character. But it doesn't mean that you can't have one that leaves out one of them or two of them or something like this. These are the ways that we make people sympathetic. A couple of other little ones. They're nice. Nice people are sympathetic. There's an old Hollywood adage. If you want to show us in 30 seconds who the hero and the villain are, have one person pet a puppy and the other person kick that puppy. Okay? We laugh at it. It's very simple. But if you are aware of these sorts of things, you will see people doing essentially that all the time in films. This is how we know they're a bad guy. In fact, they go overboard. They get generic. They get bothersome. I mean, I'm so tired of the opening scene where it's like, villain is doing something, he hires somebody to give him this item or he picks it up and then he kills them. And it's like, okay, well, he's the bad guy. He just killed the person that did him this favor. We know he's the bad guy. But that's the reason they're doing that is it takes them about 30 seconds to tell you who the bad guy is, right? So, show them being nice or, not. Another one is if people like them. This is a very quick and easy one, is if you have a main character who you want to be kind of underdog syndrome, they're down on themselves for whatever reason, but they have friends who talk about how wonderful they are, you can establish a humble character who's also likable because they have friends who like them. A good example of this, there's lots of them around, but this is why we have sidekicks so often for one reason. We talk, Sherlock Holmes and Watson. Sherlock Holmes is a very off-putting character. Depending on the adaptation, he goes borderline sociopathic. But by putting into the book the stories Watson, who likes him and who is his friend, it makes us more affectionate and fond of him. Instead of looking at him as this insane person, we look at him as kind of our quirky friend because he's Watson's quirky friend. And so Watson does a lot of heavy lifting in the Sherlock Holmes stories because he does that. He provides a good means for explanation, and he provides a foil for Sherlock Holmes in a lot of ways. And so he's kind of basically anytime you're going to see like the duo, you're going to see someone fulfilling the Watson role where one of them's going to be quirky, but the other one likes them anyway, and they like each other. It's going to make you like both characters. Having friends is going to make you like the characters. It's just a simple fact of life. And in fact, a lot of times people characterize villains by giving them friends, love interests, people who care about them. George R. Martin is a genius at this. His characters are evil, awful people, and yet sometimes you really like them simply because of the interaction he shows them going through with people who actually do like them. And you say, oh, you know, if this were my brother, I could see why you would be affectionate toward this person even though they're awful. Suddenly this is a character rather than just a cackling villain. So, just some basic means of making your characters sympathetic. It's one of the main things you should, in most cases, be trying to do. I forgot quirks, which are kind of like that. Okay, so there you go. Oh, proactivity. Proactivity is a problem. Proactivity is difficult because, I believe I've mentioned this before, if the villains do nothing, then the main characters have nothing to do. You need to get around that by giving them things to do. And I guarantee you, if you're making the character proactive, if you show them doing stuff in the very beginning scene, rather than letting other people do stuff, then we're going to like them. Instead of saying, you know, they're a stamp collector to give them a quirk, show them in the opening scene, jumping through all sorts of hoops, working really hard to find this stamp that they love. Even if the stamp has nothing to do with the main plot, spending a chapter to show us all of this stuff is going to then show us a character who's willing to sacrifice their time, their talents, their energies in order to achieve their goals, which is going to make us immediately like them more. How do we start off Indiana Jones? Going through just all sorts of horrible things in order to get this idol. Nothing goes his way. He has to react a lot to things going poorly. But at the end of this sequence, we have this guy that we like because, number one, he's a huge underdog. Everything goes wrong for him. But number two, he's been trying so blasted hard that we just love him. You'll see this happening a lot in films and stories. That, you know, the introductory scene doesn't necessarily directly relate to the plot, so instead they show the character being proactive or show some of these other things in order to establish them for us. Okay? Questions on this? Now, Brandon, what if you don't want your character to be sympathetic? That's all right, but you're going to have a hard time doing it. Because even if you show them being evil, if you show them being proactive, there's going to be something compelling about that character. This is why we like villains. And it's not a bad thing to have a character who is kind of running down the line that is mostly evil, but we like them and are fascinated by them because they're actually doing things, because they have depth, because they're consistent. Because they run into problems and overcome them, we're going to like them. And this is a good thing to do. Okay? All right. So, let's talk about kind of the harder ones. The depth and the quirks. Okay? These other things are actually fairly easy to do once you get the mindset of them. Keep an eye on this one. That's the one that people slip on the most. Okay? Is by making their characters not do something. This is a problem when, I mean, you want to make them proactive and you want to make their problems personal to them. You know, yeah.
Now, so this is going to make the character more likable, and is.
It's going to make the story more interesting, also.
Okay, and that's kind of my question. Is this going to help involve the reader in the plot?
Yeah, it's going to. They're going to be more interested if they feel like they've got a proactive character. If they have a character who's standing and watching the action, the story is going to feel static to them. That's not to say you can't do it. You can break any of these things, but you want to be aware of them. And knowing how to do some of these things are especially important if you want to have a character who's a little bit unlikable at the beginning, that is a growth character. Some of you may have tried to write these stories. How do I write a character that no one likes at the beginning? Well, you can make them unlikable for whatever reason, then do all these other things, and they'll still be sympathetic and interesting, even though we don't like them. A great example of this, the person who's best at doing this, I think, if you haven't read Name of the Wind, I've mentioned before. I don't really like Quoth, the main character. You know, he's not something I really want to hang out with. He's kind of a jerk. He's got a really bad temper. But he's fascinating to read about because of all of this other stuff. Okay? The problems, the proactivity, the expertise, all of this stuff makes him a wonderful character. People love to read about him, but he's not that likable. So if you want to have an arc where someone goes from having kind of some unlikable characteristic to going toward becoming more likable, what you want to do is you want to make sure you're hitting these other things pretty hard so that we have other reasons to identify with them and want to read their story. It's actually not that hard if you understand this kind of this balance and this makeup. If you don't, then you just make it an unlikable character who is not proactive and sits and grumbles about everything. It has to be forced to do everything. It's the big mistake I see with people who want to make kind of the sarcastic, young, like YA protagonist who doesn't want to be on this adventure and stuff like that. They make them unlikable, and then they take away all these things, and the book is just a bore. It's like pounding your head against the wall. Where on the other hand, if you make them kind of sarcastic and a little bit mean, but you give them all of this other stuff, then we're gonna love them. The dude from the Rapunzel movie, Tangled. He is not a likable person to start. The first thing you see of him is him backstabbing his buddies. Okay, but he is really good at stuff. Okay, he's really glib, and he's really funny, and he's really good at stealing stuff. And so he's also extraordinarily proactive. You mix these two things together and add in some problems, and we're willing to like the guy as he becomes a better person. And the movie, it's a fantastic film for basically these reasons. Okay? So, the hardest ones on here I feel to do are depth and quirks, which are kind of the same thing. This is easy to do if you remember it. It's easy to forget, so it becomes harder than it should be, even for professional writers. But let's talk about the depth. The depth is basically the stuff that we were talking about last week, giving a character a unique view on life. Okay? And you want to, when this is really working, make them see the world in a very different way from other characters. And you want to do it in a way that you're not bombarding us with long, boring paragraphs telling us how they see the world. One of the great arts of writing is the concept of showing instead of telling. Have any of you heard this before that are not in the class? Yeah, you've heard it before, I assume. Show, don't tell. Okay? Don't showing, don't telling. Not telling. There you go. Fix that in post, video guy. I'm joking. Showing, not telling. Okay? This is a simple adage we talk about in all types of storytelling that is just really hard to do. Okay? I won't pull punches on you. This is really hard to do because it's one of those things you kind of have to be doing all the time. And no author is perfect at it, and all authors are going to slide because showing. But someone tell me what I mean by this. You all know it, but let's talk about it. Tell me what I mean by showing rather than telling.
Well, when you show something, it's kind of like in the moment in action, and then if you tell someone, it's just like, oh, this thing happened. So
Right. Yes.
Like if you were to say Bruce hated puppies or Bruce hated, well,
Yeah, that's the best type of example. Bruce hated puppies. You will find if you go look at the writing you've done for this class, if you scan even one section, you will find a line like Bruce hated puppies. I guarantee it. Every one of you. In fact, if you look at my early drafts, you'll find them all over the place. You look at my late drafts, you'll still find them all over the place because doing this all the time is really hard. But doing it well, moving toward this is something you always want to be doing. Every draft should be pushing. Should be pushing that way. Should be pushing, like that. Should be pushing toward more telling, toward more showing. You should be taking away the tells and doing the shows. So it's okay in a first draft, though I would recommend trying to build good habits so you don't do it. It's okay in the first draft to say Bruce hated puppies. But in the second draft, when you run across that line, you should say, wow, how can I show that Bruce hates puppies? Can I have him kick a puppy? Oh, okay, there's no puppies around. Can I make something sound like the bark of a dog and have him say, I hate that neighbor's dog, or something like this? Is there any way you can show him hating puppies better than saying, I hate puppies? And you're doing this a lot, and I've read your writing, I know you do it. You're doing it a lot. And you need to find out how to do more of these shows. Now, one of the big ways to move something toward, well, I put this backwards, so to move something that way is to move it toward dialogue. A dialogue is inherently more show than it is tell, because it's happening in scene rather than abstractly in someone's thoughts. The problem is you can still do lots of telling in a dialogue. We call this maid and butler. Have I talked about maid and butler?
No.
Our early plays back in the 1800s, they would start the play by having the maid and the butler come onto the stage, and the maid would say, "As you know, the master has been away for 3 weeks." And the butler says, "Yes, I do know that. And as you know, his wife has been getting very frisky with the gardener." And the maid would say, "I do know that. Did you know?" And they go back and forth things they already both know in order to tell the audience. Feels very fake to readers when you do this. You don't want to have characters discussing things that they both already know. People usually kind of sidestep this by saying, "We've had this argument 100 times. No," which is a little bit of a clever sidestep, but usually these still feel a little fake. You want to find good ways to work these things into conversation if you can, or do a show. If the master has been away, start the scene with the maid cleaning the master's sitting room, and everything has been the same way for 3 weeks because the master has not moved it. He's been away. That's a show. The maid is doing something, and we have a description of the room that kind of shows how pristine it is, that also works into what the plot arc is. And then, you see the gardener walk past by the window, humming to himself, coming away from the tool shed, and then the lady of the house comes out a few minutes later. You have the maid wait and look, and sure enough, she comes out. That's enough. That's 10 times better. You've just given us an excellent way of setting the scene by pulling us in more rather than knocking us out more by giving us all this description. So, one way to make your characters feel alive is to learn how to show who they are rather than tell us who they are. Rather than 3 sentences of what they like and dislike in the world, writing into the scene a way that you can do that. What this does is this gets its hooks in us, like I talked about with the pyramid of abstraction. This stuff moves the story down. It all feels like it's in story. It gets its hooks in the reader, and therefore the reader is more on board. The reader is into the story more. The story becomes real to them, as opposed to just, a scene set before them with fake furniture and fake plants. Instead, you start to feel like this is a real world with living, breathing characters because things are going on. Okay? So, trick number 1. Show, don't tell. Trick number 2. So, I'm going to write that in an easier way to keep track of. Trick number 2 for doing this with characters is to make them care about things other than the plot. Okay? People come to me a lot and say, readers are telling me my characters feel flat. What can I do about this? What does it mean to have a round character? Well, this is one of the big things that we talk about. One of the ways to have a round character is to have them care about things. If a character, everything that they think about, everything that they are, is focused toward their role in the story, it feels fake to us, and the characters feel flat. I had this problem early on in my books. I would write characters into roles rather than trying to make them individuals in themselves. I didn't know I was doing this. I was a brand new writer. I think it's very common. It's particularly common when you write about the gender opposite of your own, because your natural inclination is going to put them into the book fulfilling a role. Usually it's going to be the love interest role. And so if you're thinking of a character as a love interest, rather than as a character, they're going to only do things that the love interest does. Pay attention, watch this sometime. You're storytellers, start watching. There are a few sort of quirks that people tend to do when they put someone of the opposite gender into a book. One is, you will notice that the other character often has to, the woman has to play like the straight man. Like, I notice this a lot in comic books, or in web comics, or in any sort of comic. The gender opposite the person writing it becomes, kind of like the solid, dependable one that's always kind of rolling their eyes at the antics of the main characters. That's because, rather than thinking of them as a person, they are thinking of them as a role in the plot. They become the stoic foil roles. This is what I did. My female characters were always in the book to be the love interest. So one way to get away from this is to start giving people things to care about other than the plot / the main character. Okay? Make sure they care about something. People do this. People have lives. People have cares and whims, and they are they shouldn't always be so neat. They tie up exactly to what's going on in the plot. Okay? So, something to be aware of. We may come back to this one, but I want to get on the, I want to talk a little bit more about how to do this with a main character, too. Because your main characters basically need to be the ones that you need to focus on. One of the ways you're going to do this is you're going to start thinking about your story and say, where is the character when the story starts? Most people's lives don't begin when the book begins. Sure, Portrait of the Artist, the young man has a stream of consciousness being born scene, but I don't suggest most of you do that. Your main character should be going about their life when the plot hits them like a freight train and derails it from them from it. And you should be considering what it is they want in life. What do they want most? Particularly if the plot had never happened. It's okay to intersect the plot with some of these things. But particularly, if the plot had never happened, what do they want most? And you can kind of subset this in A, before plot, and B, after plot. Or during. OT. Boy, okay. Or during the plot, we can kind of do this for, let's say, Peter Parker, before he becomes Spider-Man.
Go on a date, for goodness sake.
Go on a date. Yeah, that's one of them, but he has more. What else does he want?
Be a
No,
good
he wants to go
student.
to college.
He wants to be a big, important scientist. Yeah, he wants to learn all these things. I mean, and he has, his basic. If you read the comics, he's got his basic geeky pursuits. He wants to go to science fiction conventions. He wants to collect his comic books. He's got all these things. You give someone these things that they want to do, particularly with a couple of big hopes and dreams, and then after plot, during the plot, you give them other things. What does he want after the plot? Well, fight the villains and defeat them, but these other things don't go away, and so you've got some nice depth of character because they have powerful, different motivations that sometimes run into each other. And these things will become a big part of the plot, but the idea is, before the plot starts, they have passions and desires, and those don't go away when the plot starts. This is going to go a long way toward making your characters have more depth. Just this one step alone, doing this for every one of your characters, is going to go a long way toward it. You have to be careful not to overemphasize some of these. I'm thinking, have you guys seen Lost? There's this one guy that lost his son, and it became everything that he was. I must find my son! And it got really annoying, because anytime one of these things kind of just starts to dominate, the problem is everything else fades in the background, and you then have a character who's no longer one-sided. You have to have multiple passions and desires, and usually they should kind of be conflicting within the character. This is going to round them out quite a bit. Okay? Thoughts, questions, ideas? I'll throw a gummy bear at you. Yeah.
Something specifically that,
Woo!
that in the Wheel of Time series
Yes.
that you've added onto, but the last couple of the 6, 7, 8 sort of books.
Right.
For me, Rand got very unidimensional. He's like, I am the dragon. And
Right.
Harry and Matt remained interesting because they liked gambling and they did their blacksmithing. They had those,
Right.
the other things that
Oftentimes
they
people's
remained interesting because
Yeah.
they liked something.
Oftentimes people's favorite scene in a lot of the Wheel of Time books is a scene where Perrin, who is this this character who's been on all this questions. It's in it's in book 4, I think it is at the start, or maybe it's in I think it's book 4. He's become something big, larger than he was. He's become a friend to the wolves. And he's learned these superpowers and things. And in the beginning of this book, he goes and remembers being a blacksmith and spends the chapter just making door latches. And it's often picked as one of the people's favorite chapters in all of the books. Because he feels so real and genuine in those moments, because he is a blacksmith and he likes making things. And sure, saving the world is important, but simply sitting down and making some standing up and making some door latches or nails or whatever it is so humanizing to him and shows someone who has a passion other than the main plot that scene keeps getting chosen as one of people's favorite scenes. Likewise. One of people's favorite Star Trek episodes tends to be the one where Picard is trapped inside the alien probe and lives an entire life learning how to play the flute and having a family. Generally tops the Next Generation list as the best episode by people who watch it of all time. This is not a fight against the board scene. This is not this is not what you would pick as the most dynamic, but it is so humanizing because it shows him being passionate about different things and conflict and those different things that people love it.
You mentioned having characters' interests conflict with
Yes.
what's going on. How do you do that without making it seem contrived?
You make everything in a book is going to feel contrived to a little bit because they're really coincidental. Your job as a novelist is to learn how to work like a stage magician to make people forget about that. Because books are filled with coincidences. There's no getting around it. And so what you do is you make it rational enough. I mean, we can bring in Peter Parker. The fact that, being a scientist would not necessarily have to conflict with being a superhero. But in the second Spider-Man film, they were able to believably convince us that he would work himself so hard doing one that he couldn't do the other. And it kind of became a dichotomy between him. I can't do both of these things. It becomes a big conflict to him. Putting the things in conflict like that worked very well. So what you're going to have to do is just make them passionate about both and make them interfere with each other. Making it not contrived can be terrible. Not be terrible, can be difficult. I mean, the terrible examples of this are things like when, we get into sort of, the love interest won't let me pursue my goals in life because she's scared of wizards or something like this. This becomes feel very contrived unless you can world build it to the point that the love interest, he comes from a world, or a realm where people can use magic or execute it on sight, and his father was killed by a rogue wizard, and then he meets the main character who is a magic user, and that's a real conflict. I just don't like them is not a real conflict. So how a lot of these things work is through proper foreshadowing and world building, and making sure that the depth is there, the backstory is there to make it believable. Can you see how how you could do that the wrong way and the right way? The wrong way being with you just end up meeting the guy. She ends up meeting the guy, and then he's like, "Oh, you're a wizard. That's yucky. I'm not going to be with you anymore."
Flimsy excuses versus actual systemic things that are part of the world you would almost expect as the reader at this point.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. If the reader can say, "Oh no, that's going to be a problem," before the characters realize it, that's a good thing. Okay? All right. Yes.
I got a quick question. So,
Mhm.
with the love interest, you see with a lot of YA novels,
Yes.
there's always a love interest.
There is.
And if you are writing a YA novel and you just don't feel like it's appropriate, then what other relationship can you put in there that would draw the same?
The same? Well, nothing's going to be the same.
Or similar.
But there are lots of other interesting relationships. Mentor and student works very well, particularly in YA. But also, best friends who start not as best friends. My wife's making me watch, Camelot 90210, the new Merlin show. She really likes. It's the BBC Merlin. I call it Camelot 90210. It's quite sappy. But you can see that they've got Merlin and Arthur, and they hate each other at the start. It's going to be, I'm anticipating, hey, these two are going to be best buddies by season 3 or something like that. And that's perfectly acceptable too. And a lot of YA fantasy will do that with the strange creature. I have the dragon that I have met that I must tame, and become the dragon whisperer or whatever, and then things like that. That's a perfectly reasonable conflict. But you've got to understand, teens are interested in romantic relationships. They have just started to really get interested in them. It is one of the main things that draws them to books. That doesn't mean you have to have characters getting married by the end, but if you write a character who is a boy who is 16 and is not sizing up most girls he meets, you're probably writing him wrong. He's at least going to acknowledge which ones are pretty and which ones aren't, because that's how teenage boys of that age think. Unless you've got a very unique character that you're building that in as part of who they are. Girls, I assume, do the same thing. Not having been one, I don't know. Let's do a character building exercise. I did this last year, and I think it worked really well. The idea is to start showing you, rather than telling you, how to go about building a character who is not one-dimensional. Okay? And so we're going to build 4 characters up here, and one of the main things that we're going to focus on is not doing the expected. Okay? And I should have written that at the bottom. That's the other thing that's kind of like the last on my list there of ways to give depth to characters. Build into the character things that are unanticipated. Dave Wolverton had a great way of talking about this. He said, come up with your characters and then cast them in each other's roles. If you're building, your fantasy and you've got your wise mentor and your young plucky, princess and your kid from a farm and your best friend thief, put them in each other's roles and say, okay, the girl has to be the wise mentor for some reason, and the main character is the plucky thief, and that you just swap the roles. Or another way of approaching this is saying, all right, I've built this world, I've built this plot. Why can't my main character be the hero of this plot? What is preventing them from being the hero of this plot? If you're going to tell a sports story about a football star, make him one-armed instead. How the one-armed quarterback. How is that going to work? Things like that, where you build into it inherently problems with the main character being in the role that they are. That is separate from giving them passions, okay? You got to still give them passions that are not, but this sort of thing, you can kind of make them not fit their role, make them a square peg in a round hole, and you will immediately start to make them more interesting. All right? So, we're going to do some characters. Someone give me an age and a gender. What do we got?
Female,
48.
17.
17-year-old female, okay. Okay, how old's our guy in the next column?
52.
52-year-old guy. Okay, another woman.
28.
28, female. Okay, and another guy.
6-year-old boy.
6-year-old boy. Okay. So let's give. What is the 17-year-old female passionate about?
Croquet.
Croquet. Let me give me other ones. So I'll go with croquet. All right. U-E-T-T-E. Is that how you spell croquet?
Take off the last 2 letters.
Q-U-E-T.
Q-U-E?
Take off the last 2 letters.
Are we trying to do
Croquet, Q-U-E-T-E-T-Q. Croquet cuckoo, it's a fantasy version. All right, what is our 52-year-old guy passionate about? Coins. Let's do
romance.
What's that? Let's
Fishing, fly fishing.
Okay, we're in a science fiction and fantasy class. Let's set some of these in science fiction worlds or fantasy worlds.
Getting
String
into
theory.
wizarding school.
String theory. Okay, 50-year-old guy, string theory. All right, 20-year-old female, what could she be interested in? More of a fantasy world.
weapons?
Okay, she's weaponsmith. Okay, 6-year-old boy.
Mind reader.
Okay, let's make it a passion rather than a quirk yet.
Herbology.
What?
Herbology.
Herbology? Okay. All right. Interest number 2. I want a different interest. Something else that they're passionate about.
Cooking.
Cooking?
Oh,
No.
52-year-old.
No. 17-year-old female. What's she passionate about? Give me something else.
Necromancy, I like that one.
What's that?
Necromancy.
Necromancy? Cocaine necromancy? Okay.
That's what you do skill in.
Okay, I'm going to put her in a modern setting. Okay? So she's modern in the UK. Lives in the UK. Lives in 21st century UK. Okay? What else is the guy passionate about?
He wants to get into wizarding school.
Now we're in string theory. He's in the science fiction world. I'm going to stick with science fiction. I'm going to say this is the year 2400.
It's like avenging
Zen gardens. Okay, we're gonna go Zen gardens.
So things that are against the main plot line.
Okay. 28-year-old female weaponsmith. What else is she passionate about?
Puppies.
You're going a little too weird, I think, on this one. Remember, these things don't have to be quite so weird. Let me just throw one up here. She's a guardian of her family. She's got younger siblings. She's got siblings, and her father's has Alzheimer's. And she's just basically all about being in charge of her family. Since her mother's not around, her father has Alzheimer's, she's got younger siblings. Passionate about family. Remember, we don't have to make these all. The reason I'm throwing this one up here is a lot of these are kind of quirky. You don't have to push toward quirks all the time with these. Sometimes the most basic and most fundamental passions have that everyman attribute to them that are going to make the character much more sympathetic. And since we already have a 8-year-old female weaponsmith in a fantasy world, which is a little bit odd, I want to push this one towards something a little more normal. All right, 6-year-old herbologist.
Color red.
Color red. All right. All right.
My 3-year-old is passionate about the color red. Everything has to be red.
Okay.
It's gonna be odd with hers.
Okay. Color red. All right. All right. So now we're going to add some more depth here. We are going to let's see. We are going to add a secret in each one of these people's past that they don't want other people to know about. All right? Our croquet playing necromancer. Shall we say that she's...
necromancy qualifies.
Yeah, necromancy probably is, but what did she do with the necromancy? She did something.
She sacrificed
Her dog
her
is
neighbors.
actually-
It's an increase her croquet game with interesting round-shaped objects.
No, she
Her
had
dog is actually-
She had a ritual with the neighbor's cat.
Loved one back or something.
Okay, maybe, okay. Loved one died. I'm kind of liking the loved one died. Loved one died. She's trying to use necromancy.
Failed at raising them from the dead.
And failed at raising them from the dead.
Turned him
And,
into a zombie.
okay,
Took him
okay,
in the cellar.
okay. Okay, I'm actually liking this one. The reason for this being that it's not just she lost somebody, which is actually a good one. You'll see lots of authors using this. It's very common. They lost someone in their past, and it's kind of shaped who they are. It's part of, it's Batman, right? But taking it one step further and saying she got into necromancy because of her loved one died. She tried to raise them and failed, and now there are horrible consequences. This is actually a pretty good way to start a story. She's got her father locked in the dungeon in the basement as this powerful lich zombie that has the soul of a demon in him, and she failed in raising him, and now what do? And I go to my evil patriarch demon father for advice sometimes, but I'm really just trying to find a way to get my father's soul back in there. You've got a great little kind of weird thing going on here that could be completely separate from the main plot, or at least only sideways part of it, that now she's got a lot more depth. Our 52-year-old guy, string theory, Zen Gardens, what is his job? Are we going to call him, is he a theoretical physicist?
Trash.
I assume we've got to have, you want him to be a trash man?
Yes.
No.
You got fired trying to be trash man.
Okay, trash man.
Cute little worker.
Okay, we're going to make him a trash man in the future. Future trash man. And so, how's this character gonna more tie together? What's sort of secret does he have in his past? Let's get, you guys over here have been doing a good job. Give me something.
He digs through people's trash to create his Zen gardens with.
Okay, Zen trash gardens is pretty cool.
But why is it trash?
Didn't like the government, wasn't there some conspiracy was involved in the government, so now he's forced into being a trash man to stay low-key or something?
Okay.
He used to be a string theorist, but like he designed something and like his family died in an accident. So now
Okay,
he
let's
gave it
stay
up.
away from family dying because we've kind of got two things, but I like the rest of that. Okay? He created something really dangerous. What did he create?
Immortality.
Immortality?
A bomb.
Bomb? How many like immortality? Raise your hand.
I think-
How many like bomb? Okay, none of you like either of those? Just kind of sitting there?
Like he created an alternate time loop. Because with string theories, you have
Right,
separate
yeah,
time sides,
okay.
you have something
Alternate
like-
time loop. He changed. Okay, I like this. Okay, time loops.
He brought his evil self into the
And so he did something with a weird time loop, and now he's in hiding. I can dig that. That's kind of working. All right, weaponsmith. What's she got in her past?
Obviously her parents are dead.
Okay. What's that?
Sorry.
Yeah, she does have to support the siblings. That's already something she got for her. We've got lesbian over here as a suggestion.
It might be going back to the death of a family member, but maybe she was somehow responsible for the absent mother.
Okay. Let's again stay away from the family member thing, just so we aren't leaning on. Normally, if you were writing this story, I'd say go for that. But we already have one here. I want to push.
One story.
What we could, they could be.
Okay.
They could be. No, they can't be because unless the string theory loop, you can actually use string theory to tie between these.
What about a forbidden love interest? She's trying to take care of her family, but let's say that she wants to be with somebody else, but her
Okay, I'm going
responsibility-
to.
Her blacksmith.
I would say go ahead with that one, except for one thing. I want to push you away from assuming that the woman's passions and plot have to be about a love interest. This is what's that?
She's an anti-war pacifist.
Okay, that could be something. Let's just throw out a few more to force you guys to think. Do you see why I stopped that? By the way, it would be just fine to do that, but a lot of people, it's just part of our natural thing, is to assume. You didn't throw out for the 50-year-old guy love interest. You threw it out for the 28-year-old female because we're going to assume that if a 20-something female is in a book, that they're there and that their main focus is going to be on a love interest. And I want to push you away from doing that. Just because it's going to be what's expected of you. You guys heard of the Bechdel test? Bechdel test? You guys know what it is? You should look it up. There's a feminist webtoonist who noticed that fairly common in stories, particularly in films, there will be one female character and a whole bunch of guys. And the woman will never talk to other women except about romantic interests. And then the only scenes of a woman talking to another woman, so they started to call it the Bechdel test. Does this book or movie pass the Bechdel test? Is there more than one woman in the book? And does that woman talk to another woman about something other than a man? And you will be surprised at how often this comes up. Very frequently, you should study a little feminist theory, but very frequently in storytelling, people will, we're aware of not trying to, make a single weak female. And so writers, particularly male writers, will write into it one super strong, super female lead who there is nothing wrong with. Remember this over here? Nothing wrong with her. She's kind of the perfect, and the guys will be befuddled all the time, and they'll be making mistakes. But the girl is like super, she always has the right answer and things like this. Honestly, okay, let this get around. But the missionary guide did this. Didn't you guys hardly aren't old enough for the discussions. There were like these tapes that went along with the discussions. You're laughing. You listen to these tapes, and it's like the elders come on and they do a horrible job. And then the other elders come on and do a other job. And then the end is, let's see how the sisters do it. And then they come on and do it perfectly. Which is actually overreacting to PC-ness. You see this actually with minority characters too. Watch how often nowadays in a video game or movie, there will be one black character and they will be super awesome. They will be like the most awesome person around, but they aren't allowed to be the main character. They're either like the general, or they're they're like they're whatever. They're God in the Bruce Almighty movies. They are this awesome minority character. Maybe they're the magical Negro. You can read about that one. But they're the super character, but they're the only one. They're alone in this world, a sea of white males. There's like one minority and one woman. And neither of them have any real problems with them. And they will probably save everybody a couple times. But the story doesn't get to be about them. This is kind of the modern level of how kind of we're acting against, we're being PC, we're making sure we're including minorities, but they don't ever get to be the leads.
Just going back to the female, why couldn't she have a burning passion desire to map the world she's in, but because she's stuck taking care of her siblings, her only option to be able to hear about the outside world is through the weaponry that she sells to people who are actually traveling.
Okay, I like that. Travel. That's not a secret, but that's another passion, but I'm liking this one as a conflict. She can actually make this a secret if you want to. She's not telling her family that she feels really tied down by them.
He travels and enters beauty contests.
No, but nice try. No, she secretly has a desire to travel. I'm keeping this one a little bit more normal because the others are getting a little weird. This is a really cool one. This is a really good start to a character. Okay?
I would say maybe she made someone else pitched something similar. Maybe she made a weapon for a war that changed the tide of the war, and she doesn't like the way that that weapon changed the tide of the war. And that's the secret.
Or she's gotten the opportunity now to go and visit one of these battles, and she sees what she's been doing. She's like, Tony Stark, holy cow! So I'm going to build an Iron Man. I don't know. All right, let's go on to this one over here. You got one more thing. Let's go.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
When you create characters, do you map them out like this to kind of?
I often will to add flavor. I will start asking myself kind of harder questions about this. I'll go deeper than this. We don't have time for a lot of this. I'll tell you some of the other questions we're going to ask. In fact, maybe we'll do this guy's secret passion, and then I'll do like one different question for each person. So, what's a 6-year-old's secret? I don't think a 6-year-old can have a lot of secrets. Let's not do the 6-year-old having a deep, dark secret. Not everybody needs one. What's that?
I liked what they said before, making him so he can read people's minds. Something no one
Okay,
knows.
all
that
right,
makes him really
clairvoyant.
something.
Cool. All right. Okay. So where would I go deeper in this? How I would start to go deeper is I would start to build other characters into their lives that creates friction with them. Or I would start to look at setting elements that would create friction with them. I would start trying to add depth to them by like the girl croquet player. I'm like, all right, do we have political leanings? What kind of personality type are we gonna look for? Are we gonna use the color test? I don't always use the color test, but occasionally I'm like, okay, we're gonna make her red or whatever, that color thing, or I'll use this or I'll use that, or just something to say, okay, I'm gonna give a personality archetype to this person. So let's give her a personality archetype. What kind of personality is she?
Introvert.
What's that? Introvert, okay. What kind of introvert? There's lots of different types. Scholarly introvert, shy introvert, doesn't really notice the world around them, introvert, obsessive introvert.
Yeah.
Okay, I like obsessive introvert. Okay, so there you go. We get a personality archetype. That's going to help right there. So, 52-year-old guy. Let's add an unusual political or religious philosophy to him that does not meld that well with everything else he holds.
Racist. Staunch Catholic.
Okay, he's racist. He's racist against, say, an alien species.
Xenophobic.
No, xenophobic's been done too much. Alien racist is better. It's more realistic. Well, not realistic. Both of them are realistic. But if he has a certain alien race that he really doesn't like, was it you or was it you? That was you. Well, if he has a certain alien race that he just hates, that's going to add some interesting things. Now this is getting to the point where we've got a lot of things for this guy to focus on. So I would back off from kind of personality quirks at this point. I've kind of got to go, and I'd have to start working on plot sort of things. Because you don't want the characters, though you want to have a mix of different things, you don't want them to feel like they're everything but the kitchen sink. And this guy's feeling pretty schizophrenic to me right now. And so really I would start looking at ways to tie this all in. We don't want to go too far afield. You know, it's good to be passionate about things not related to the plot, but if we just have a list of random things, you're going to forget about them as you're writing. It's going to be very hard to be consistent. And so I'd start trying to tie a few of these together. That would be my next step here. All right, 20-year-old, 8-year-old female. What else can we do for her? I'm gonna start with her with a plot hook. Let's say what happens to her. She's got her life with all of this, and what happens that changes and shakes up her entire life right at the beginning.
Someone threatens her family, she has to build a weapon for them.
Okay, threatens her family, has to build a weapon for them, that's great.
A sibling that she's trying to take care of runs away.
Oh, hey, that's a pretty good one. You've got a little bit of a Pride and Prejudice thing there. Yeah.
Along with that, someone just mentioned with a weapon, maybe she got a special commission to build a special weapon and it's first time magic implemented into it, and the sibling takes it and goes.
There you go. Now that's a great one. Okay. Her younger sister
Steals the magic sword.
steals the magic sword. Okay, I like that a lot. That's going to be great with her. So she's got to chase her younger sibling. You know, maybe her, I don't know, whatever you want to come up with. You'd have to then build the younger sibling to make sure they're not flat. But you've got a nice sort of story there. Why would she run off with the magic sword? Our character has to chase her into the middle like a battlefield where the girl's going to like sell the prototype to the wrong side or to any side or something like that. Plus she's getting chased by the person who commissioned this but thinks she stole it. You got a great story happening there. Okay, 6-year-old. How are you going to make the 6-year-old proactive? That's a big challenge.
He tries to affect the world around him on the things that he hears in people's minds.
Okay. He's got a Superman complex.
Maybe one of his parents is the bad guy and he knows.
You guys know Superman complex? Studying your kind of deviant psychological behavior will be really useful for you guys. This is the kind of personality quirk that is, you feel like you've got to rescue everybody. It's borderline codependent, where you feel like everything, your job is to make everyone happy. And if you aren't, you don't focus on yourself, you focus on everyone to the extreme. That could be a really interesting thing to try and work through with a 6-year-old who's got this amazing power and feels like he should be able to fix everything. That could be a good story. Your next step, and we have to end, but so we won't actually do this, but your next step would be, if you really wanted to, go do this sort of thing with your friends, or just take these characters, and the way to practice is have each of these characters kind of walk through the same scene and have them notice different things. Have them describe it in different ways. The female, our necromancers, like, where are the ley lines in this city that I first come to? Can I feel the power? Are there any powerful necromancy? They'll notice, like, the Gothic architecture and say, wow, that's a warding against this sort of thing. Or, she may notice the billboards or because she's the croquet person or whatever. You gotta, I would actually probably make her a sports star. I may not use croquet. I may use something else because croquet is a little bit quirky.
If you have to use any of these characters, we let us know. That'd be awesome.
I don't use. I probably won't. But if I were going to do her, I'd probably change it to something like polo, so that it would be so there would be more of a reason for her to tour and things like this. But string theory guy. He walks through the city. What is he going to see? Does he have he's got a really scholarly background. So is he going to know the different types of architecture? Or is he going to see the old city? Or is he going to be not caring about that because he's so science fiction-y, whatever? Is he going to be interested in the technology and the types of phones people are carrying? The woman over there is going to see weapons and know their grade. She's going to see medals. Whereas the kid is going to be like, everything. See, he's gonna be like, red, I want the red teddy bear, and that person, he's fascinated by colors or something. I don't know. Your goal is to build these characters and then try and describe the world in a way that is unique to them, and have them all go through the same scene, and have, without info dumps, show us all this stuff about them, without ever telling us in a single line their passions by what they notice in the world. Never say, she was a necromancer. Have her say, that's a ward against necromancy. I won't be able to enter that building. Suddenly we know she's a necromancer, and that's a much better hook. You could start this book by saying, Jill stood outside the building, confronted by an ancient necromancy ward, realizing she wasn't going to be able to go with the rest of her school group into the state capitol because someone had warded it against the necromancers. You start your sentence like that. Can you imagine a nice YA book starting like that? There's a great hook line for you that tells us, we've got a 17-year-old necromancer on a school field trip, unable to enter the state capitol. So she's like, I'm going to have to fake a heart attack or something. I don't know. Do this with everybody and see if you can get across, mastery of string theory. If you can get across, love of siblings and family without actually having a say. She loved her family deeply. Okay? And that's your challenge. Do this with your own characters in your next scenes that you're writing. All right?